Join me on the field of Almansa, where destiny shall be decided by the clash of arms. Towards the end of the video, we'll analyse the battle and highlight how the British Army's evolution was intertwined with the rise of an empire that nearly conquered the world. Venture back to April 1707. The ink on the Acts of Union is barely dry. England and Scotland have just become one nation. By 1707, Europe was engulfed in the War of the Spanish Succession, triggered by the death of the childless Charles II of Spain. Major European powers are split on supporting Philip of Anjou, grandson of Louis XIV, for the Bourbon cause. Alternatively, Archduke Charles of Austria, of the illustrious Habsburg house, emerged as another contender for the Spanish throne. A powerful alliance of Britain, Portugal and the Dutch Republic moved swiftly under the leadership of the Earl of Galway, Henri de Massue, a valiant French Protestant now serving the British Crown. The Bourbon coalition, comprising of French battalions, Spanish volunteers, exiled Irish warriors and stalwart Walloons, was led by James Fitzjames, Duke of Berwick, the illegitimate son of King James II, now fighting under the French banner. If France and Spain united under one crown, it would disrupt the delicate balance of power. The battlefield lay on the flat, open plains outside Almansa in southeastern Spain, a location with few natural defences, ideally suited to traditional line warfare, but deadly when outflanked. From Madrid, the Allied army pressed southward toward Almansa, while Bourbon forces, comprising both French and Spanish units, marched west from Valencia. Their paths intersected, setting the stage for a bloody battle. On one side of the field stood the Habsburg Allied coalition, fielded approximately 16,000 to 16,500 men in all, organised into around 42 infantry battalions and 53 cavalry squadrons. The British contingent included 16 infantry battalions, representing approximately 38% of the Allied force, while Killigrew's Dragoon Brigade provided just 5 squadrons, some 110 men apiece, giving the British about 550 cavalry. British artillery consisted of 6 English field guns, under the command of Michael Richards, deployed across the left wing. On Galway's right stood 19 Portuguese battalions, about 45% of the Allied infantry. The 2nd Marquis of Minas, António Luís de Sousa, commanded the Portuguese contingent. Galway granted the Portuguese cavalry the place of honour on the Allied right wing, in accordance with the Treaty of Alliance, directly opposite the Bourbon Spanish cavalry. The 20 Portuguese guns under the command of Mascarenhas were massed into 3 batteries and deployed directly opposite Berwick's left wing, covering the slopes from which the French heavy cavalry launched. 7 battalions of Dutch infantry, led by Jacques-Louis Comte de Noyelles, fought with discipline and resolve, though each unit was below full strength. In addition to a lone German battalion of around 570 men, the Allied force included French Huguenot infantry fielding between 500 to 800 troops, both positioned in the centre of the Allied infantry line. While on the opposing side of the field stood a fierce 23,000-strong Bourbon army of equal numbers of French and Spanish regiments formed the backbone of this force. The French contingent consisted of some 26 battalions of Louis XIV's most hardened line infantry units, Royal Picardy, Armagnac, Champagne, Normandy and Ile-de-France. First-line French cavalry was organised into 3 brigades, Louvigny, Niçel and Ile-du-Vigier brigades, but altogether only mustered 15 squadrons of cuirassiers and dragoons, squadrons in Niçel brigade, and 7 squadrons in the Ile-du-Vigier brigade, all positioned on the left wing. The Bourbon army mustered only roughly 14 field pieces, a mix of French 4 and 6-pounders, and heavier Spanish guns arranged in batteries on their wings and in reserve. The Duke of Berwick brought with him several exiled Irish regiments into French service when he took command of the Bourbon army in northeastern Spain. Although known as the Irish Brigade, they fought as part of the French infantry formations. The Spanish infantry consisted of about 25 battalions, each fielding 500 to 800 men, integrated with French line units. These formations were locally recruited, predominantly from Castile, Murcia, Badajoz and Valencia. Notably, the sole Valencian formation was the Regimiento Valencia, renamed Jaén, led by Colonel Riera with some 300 troops. Approximately 34 squadrons of Spanish horsemen, around 3,400 troopers under the Duke of Popoli, comprised Berwick's right wing. These units blended heavy cuirassier regiments with lighter dragoon contingents, recruited from the same regions as the Spanish infantry. The number of French cavalry was 35 squadrons, 18 in the first line, 17 in second, under the command of Maréchal d'Asfeld, with some 3,500 troopers. Among Philip V's troops were 3 battalions of the Reales Guardias Wallones, Royal Walloon Guards, formed part of the Bourbon Infantry Centre, a prestigious infantry regiment recruited from the Spanish Netherlands. Raised in October 1702, they joined the Duke of Berwick's Franco-Spanish army and engaged as part of Vallet's brigade with the Spanish Guards. By mid-afternoon on April 25, 1707, both armies had assumed their battle positions beneath a blazing sun. Precisely at 3 p.m, the Bourbon gunners positioned on the Duke of Berwick's right swept the Allied left with an orchestrated storm of shot and shell. The ground shook as iron hail tore through ranks and earth alike, inflicting unspeakable agony. After a short midday artillery exchange, Galway commanded his infantry to storm the Bourbon centre. Their early success in repelling Berwick's infantry line came at a cost, however, as it left an ever-expanding gap between the Allied centre and the Portuguese contingent, led by their commanders, the Marquis of Minas, who was now in his 80s. Sensing the perfect opportunity, Berwick sent in his cavalry. He focused a cavalry-heavy thrust on the weaker Allied left flank. The Franco-Spanish riders slammed into the vulnerable Portuguese flank, though the Marquis and his mistress, disguised as a man, rallied several squadrons in a fierce rearguard action. The Portuguese formation ultimately shattered and dispersed. Some accounts suggest that the commander's elderly years undermined the troops' morale and unity once the battle began to turn against them. As a result of the central formation being in disarray and under attack from 3 separate directions, the men were surrounded. Galway directed a tactical withdrawal of 13 battalions, mostly British and Portuguese, who fell back approximately 12 kilometres. A few cavalry squadrons under the Marquis of Minas provided a rear guard to cover the Portuguese right wing's retreat. They were compelled to surrender at dawn the next morning on the 26th of April 1707. The prisoners were stripped of weapons and baggage, then marched in columns under escort back, towards the nearest Bourbon strongholds of Valencia, then on to Madrid. Many captured Allied soldiers, especially the Portuguese, were treated harshly. British and Dutch prisoners were often dispersed into prison systems in Spain or France. Most would never return home. The Allies suffered around 4,000 killed or wounded compared to Bourbon losses of between 1,500 to 2,000. The vast majority of the French Huguenots and German soldiers died, and very few were captured, due to their position on the battlefield. The bulk of the cavalry escaped, some 3,500 men. Galway directed this cavalry force to withdraw to the northeast into Catalonia. The 36th Herefordshire Regiment of Foot, which had been nearly wiped out, was subsequently reformed upon its return to England. Battlefield memories shared by those who experienced it firsthand. Lieutenant Henry Manners, British infantryman, reportedly fought in a square to the last musket ball before being captured. Accounts describe Portuguese regiments pleading with their officers to retreat, only to be ordered forward. Many were annihilated. The Irish Brigade, fighting for France, earned grim notoriety. One British soldier recorded in a letter, "We were slain by men in our own coats." The victory at Almansa secured almost all of eastern Spain, bringing it under Philip V's control and paving the way for the Nueva Planta decrees. Allied operations were confined to Catalonia and the Balearic Islands for the meantime. It has since been hailed as the most important Spanish engagement of the war and a masterpiece of Berwick's tactical skill. The battlefield defeat helped forge a British army that would one day build an empire. Here are 4 key dimensions through which that defeat forged the army's later strength. The devastating loss at Almansa forced Parliament to centralise recruitment and standardise regiments, replacing patronage with merit-based commissions and professional training depots. The Almansa failings exposed the perils of rigid formations and inspired a shift toward flexible skirmish lines, close cooperation between infantry, cavalry and artillery, and realistic field exercises. The debacle at Almansa spurred a logistical revolution. A permanent supply corps, regulated food and ammunition standards, and on-hand medical and veterinary teams. By transforming defeat into a source of esprit de corps, Almansa cemented a martial identity that empowered the British Army's imperial ventures. By 1707, the British Empire held sway over territories in North America, the Caribbean islands, sections of the African coast, and key points in Asia, ranging from colonial settlements and plantation economies to chartered trading forts of the East India Company and newly acquired lands. It can be argued that the Royal Navy laid the Empire's maritime foundations, but it was the British Army boots on the ground that actually conquered, garrisoned and administered most of those territories. Battle by battle. Marston Moor, Culloden, Cartagena de Indias, and beyond. Britain parlayed military triumphs into territorial gains, building an empire whose borders followed the arc of its conquests. Come with me on this battle-by-battle exchange and watch the empire expand with unwavering momentum. Join us next Friday at 1500 GMT at the historic site of the Battle of Oudenarde, 11th of July 1708. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment and give us a like. See you then.